This week on Q&A, our guest is political historian Robert Caro. He's a two-time Pulitzer Prize winner and author of the ongoing multi-volume biography, The Years of Lyndon Johnson.
Bob Caro, bring us up to date on LBJ book number 4.
Well, here's the part that I've written and handed into the publisher already. The top page says Part 1, Johnson versus Kennedy, 1960. It's about how Lyndon Johnson and Jack Kennedy fought for the presidential nomination in 1960, the Democratic Convention, and how Johnson came to be the vice presidential candidate. Basically goes through his vice presidency and up to the assassination. I think that's something like about 570 manuscript pages. And this is what I've written since. That I haven't handed into the publisher. It's still just a manuscript, untyped. Looks like it's about the same length. And that's sort of hard to describe where what's in there, because a lot of it is not chronological, but it's an examination of these three figures. This is really a book not just about Lyndon Johnson, but about Robert Kennedy and Jack Kennedy and the interplay of their personalities, particularly Robert, I guess. And it's a very complicated story that I don't think people know, of two very complicated people, and Robert Kennedy and Lyndon Johnson. And I had to really go into that and try to explain it, because it is part of the story all the way through the end of Johnson's presidency. That's done, and I suppose chronologically at the moment Johnson is passing the 1965 Voting Rights Act, and that's sort of in one way where I'm up to now.
It was 2002 when the last book came out. It was 1,167 pages.
Yes.
What's your guess about the timing and the length of this book?
You always ask me in our interviews, and I always tell you, and I'm always wrong. I said I have a number of years, I decided to say. But I suppose the book will be about as long as that, as Master of the Senate, judging from where I am.
And any instinct how you're doing with your timing?
My instinct is always wrong. Things always take me longer than I think they were going to do. You know, my first book, which is about the power broker, I told Ina we were going to be done in 9 months, because I had this outline saying I was going to be done in 9 months, and it took 7 years. So I have to tell you, I don't think my guesses are very good, but it's a number of years. It's not. I've passed the halfway mark in doing this book, but I still have a ways to go.
I know one of the questions I asked you some years ago, because you told me you were going to go to Vietnam and live there for a while.
Yes.
Have you done it?
No, we haven't done that yet.
What's the plan?
Well, that's why I say it's complicated to talk about. It's a complicated structure in this book. Vietnam is going to start to really enter Lyndon Johnson's presidency right at the point that I am now. In 1964, you could say he kept it tamped down, so I can deal with it briefly. I'm almost up to that point where we're going to go, and Vietnam will become a central thing. You know, I've done all the research in the Johnson Library, and that I have all the notes on the meetings, you know, on Vietnam, which is getting that information was quite a job. There's a lot of it, a lot of meetings. So from that standpoint, I'm sort of done with Vietnam. But as I told you some years ago, I want to go there and really get more of a feel for it on the ground.
Best I can tell you from the past, you started on the project, the first book in 1967.
On the Power Broker?
On the Power Broker.
Correct, yes.
1974 it was published.
Right.
All about a man named Robert Moses.
Right.
I'm going to just quote from the opening. That you have a little quote from Sophocles, and then you say, you use the quote that says, "One must wait until the evening to see how splendid the day has been."
Yes.
Why did you open the Moses book
with that because it was something that just stuck in my mind, and it seemed to me to sum up Robert Moses's career. You know, for decades, as he was shaping New York, building all the bridges, the parks, the housing projects, determining the city's priorities, he was such a hero to New York, you know, and the policies. But at the end, where was New York when his 44 years of power had ended? That's what we see. And I thought that quote, "One must wait until the evening to see how splendid the day has been," summed up what I was trying to say in that book.
You, I think, told me on the record, if you didn't, you can counter that you sell as many as 25,000 copies of the Power Broker still every year?
Oh, I don't think I don't know how many copies they sell. I would say it's because I don't ask. I do know because I just had to ask for another interview. It's in its 48th printing, and it's apparently selling sort of as what I know they say it's as well as ever. It just sells steadily, and it's 34 years since. That's the thing I'm proud of. I don't actually know the number.
Do you have an example of where it is used in some way that you think is a good example of what you really set out to do?
Yes. I think people go to a specific chapter, which is called 1 Mile. When I was trying to show the human cost of these great public works projects, and when I was writing The Power Broker, nobody was taking, you know, in every book it said the human cost of highways, the human cost, and I said to Ina,
your wife?
My wife, and the only person who works on these books besides me, I said, you know, I want to show what the words human cost mean. So what I decided to do was Robert Moses built 672 miles of highways in New York, expressways and parkways. I said, I'm going to take 1 mile. I'm going to just see what happened there. So I took a mile of the Cross Bronx Expressway that ran through this heart of the Bronx, a heart of a neighborhood, a real neighborhood. And Moses not only took down the 54 6- and 7-story apartment houses in that mile, but the whole neighborhood in which 60,000 people lived was really destroyed. And I went to find those people who had moved away and see what the highway had done to their lives. And to, you know, you see people on the subways all the time, kids in school reading The Power Broker. But I noticed when they talk to me about it more than any other chapter, that's the one that they seem to come back to. And when I think about it, I mean, I remember saying to Ina, we were really broke at the time that I did The Power Broker, and you know, so the length of time that the book was taking, which kept getting longer and longer, was a real consideration. And I remember saying to her, you know, to research this, I mean, the book could be done without it. To put this in is going to take 6 months of research and writing. Of course, Ina said, you know, well, it should be done, as she always said. And looking back, I'm really glad that I did that chapter.
We're at West 57th Street in New York City.
Yeah.
How long have you been in this office?
I just signed my 4th lease, so I think I've been here 16 or 17. I've written 3 books here, the 3 Johnson books.
We're in one room.
Yes.
How often do you come to this room?
Well, I work every day. When I'm writing, I don't want to exaggerate that I work harder than I do. The way I do a schedule is I don't take days off while I'm writing. Not because I'm so industrious, but because it's simply too hard. I don't have the ability to take off a weekend and then come in Monday morning and start up again. You always have to gear up again. So it's easier for me not to take days off while I'm writing. Like I haven't had a day off because I've been doing this section for quite some time. But then when I finish a section, then I take a long vacation.
So how many straight days have you worked now, do you know?
Well, I worked since September.
Right straight through,
yeah.
Every day, 7 days a week?
Well, I had some sort of flu for a day. I think I think I worked every day since then, yeah.
And do you dress like that every time you come to work?
Well, I probably put on the blazer because I knew I was going to be interviewed, but I always wear a sport jacket and a tie to work because, so I don't sound too foolish. I found it was very easy. My books take a long time to do, years and years. And I have an editor and a publisher who are very understanding, and they never ask me, you know, how I'm doing, you know. They don't rush me. So it's real, I found on the Power Broker, it's really easy to fool yourself about how much you've done, you know, to take off, you know, then you think you've been working so hard. So I started putting down how many words, you know, I do in a day. And that was one device to remind myself that I'm going to work, you know, that this is a job. So I do that. I try to start at the same time, you know, in the morning. And I try to work like, you know, as a boy, I went to a high school where you had to wear a tie and a jacket, and that's why I do it, to remind myself it's work.
And there's nobody here but you?
No.
And Ina is the only other person that works on this?
Yes.
You've been married for how many years?
50 years.
Behind you is what?
Well, behind me is this is the outline for the last volume of the book. Want me to tell you how I go about doing it?
Sure.
When I finish, I try to do the bulk of the research before I start writing, although that's, you know, it never quite works out that way, because when you get into a specific chapter or a specific section, you realize that those files in the Johnson Library that you thought didn't matter are really the heart of it. And when you get, so you're always, but I do the bulk of the research before I start writing. Then comes the thing that's really hard, and I make myself not do anything until I can tell in one paragraph, or at most two, what is the book about, that I can sum up the whole book. I mean, that's when I really think it through. And if you saw me then, you'd see me here sitting at this desk, sort of, you know, having a lot of problems doing. It takes a long time for me to do that. But when you get the idea of the book, so it's so succinct and you know what you're trying to say, then when it's necessary for you to go off on a digression or something, you know, a biography of Richard Russell or a study of civil rights and a study, then you know it's easier to get back to your central theme. So after I do that, from that, I take that and I simply sit down and type an outline of the whole book. This is all the way to the last line of the book. I always have to know the last line.
So you've already written the last line?
I know the last line. Then what I do, having done that, is I take a notebook. This is the notebook. And each of those sentences becomes, let's say, I don't know if I can find one here.
And that's in longhand, a lot of it.
A longhand, yes, I do a lot of my work in longhand. But you'd say, you know, this is how he dealt with his secretaries. You know, he made them so conscious of time. You couldn't have any outside friend. Then what you do is you go to the file cabinets where I have all my interviews and all my notes. And I simply go through them in order. Whenever there's a point in there that illustrates one of the points on this outline, I put the number in there in red, so that as I'm writing the chapter, I simply go to that thing and that point, that piece of information that illustrates the point. And when I'm done with that, I start writing. I write my first few drafts in longhand on these white legal pads. And then I go to my typewriter and do a number of drafts, you know, on the typewriter.
Has there ever been a point in all these, 42 years, or since you started all this, that you ever said, I'm sorry I went in that direction, I wish I was doing something else?
You mean?
You personally saying, I know I committed to these 4 books on LBJ,
no.
never ever said this is not a good idea?
No. Well, the opposite, the opposite is true. I didn't realize, because, what I'm trying to do, as I know, I think I've said to you in previous interviews, I don't look at these books on Robert Moses and Lyndon Johnson as biographies. I never had any idea, any interest in writing a book just to tell the life of a famous man. What I'm interested in is political power and how it works in America. So I think of the power broker, and to whatever extent it works on this level as an examination of what real power is in cities, urban power, in all the cities of America in the 20th century, because you say, we're taught that power in a democracy comes from being elected, comes from the ballot box. But here was a man who was never elected to anything. And he had more power than anyone who was, more power than any mayor, more power than any governor. And he held this power for 44 years. And you say, when I was a young reporter and I started to think about Robert Moses, I said, so everything you're writing, Bob, is basically baloney, because it's all based on this assumption that all power comes from being elected. So I said, if I could find out the sources of Robert Moses' power, which I had no idea what they were, neither did anybody else, and show how he got what it was and how he got it and how he used it, I would be adding something. I would be saying, this goes beyond what we're taught in the traditional textbooks. This is what the raw, naked essence of urban political power consists of. Now, when Lyndon Johnson, I said, I want to do the same thing with national political power. But I didn't realize, how rich that was going to be. Like, I thought the first volume was going to be it was going to be just a few chapters. I didn't realize how interesting it would be to see how he rose to power. How does someone pour from an isolated area? How does he rise to national political power? So these things just keep getting more and more interesting.
For those who may be seeing you for the first time, you were born right up here on the Upper West Side?
Yes, right near here.
Princeton graduate?
Yes.
Children?
Yes, I have one son, Chase.
How old is he?
Chase is 51.
And what kind of work is he doing?
He's a lawyer.
I counted 3,801 pages in your 4 books. Your first book, The Power Broker, was 1,246, including index and everything. Your second book, which came out in 1982, The Path to Power, had 882 pages in it, and you dedicated that book to your wife.
Yes.
And in that book, Path to Power, the quote was from Shakespeare, out front. More is thy due than more than all can pay. Why did you pick that?
Because that's how I feel about Ina. More is thy due than more than all can pay.
Where did you meet her, by the way?
I met Ina when I was at Princeton. She went to Connecticut College for Women. And we got married right after graduating.
And what role does she really play in all these books that you've done?
Oh, she plays a really significant role. I've never been, there's nothing wrong with having teams of researchers, as many other biographers do. And so I'm not saying that. But for myself, I've never been able to trust anyone to, I wouldn't feel right. With Ina, she's a historian in her own right, a medieval historian. She's written one book, which is published, and another one she's just finishing now. But in addition to that, she's a great researcher. You can send Ina to a library, and you will know if there's anything to be found in that library. She will find it. And this last book, Master of the Senate, she went down to the Richard Russell Library and came back with a picture of this very complicated, powerful senator who led the Southern Bloc for decades. That's absolutely, because she just refused to stop looking until she had looked in every possible file. She's a great researcher.
Give us, please, the quick synopsis on the 3 books that have been written, starting with The Path to Power in '82. What did it cover?
Well, it covered from his birth is growing up in this lonely, remote, isolated area, the Texas Hill Country, which was really cut off from the rest of the United States, creating his first political machine at college, rising, getting to Congress, how he, while he was still in Congress as a young congressman, thinking of a way to get national political power. That's the first volume, the heart of it. Second volume is basically, the heart of it is a stolen election, the 1948 election.
This is means of ascent?
Means of ascent. And I said, you know, we keep talking about stolen elections in America. They're part of the I want people to understand political power. We may not like to hear it, but stolen elections are a part of political power in the United States. I mean, when I think of Bush v. Gore, people look at it as if, you know, oh, what is this? It's part of our history. So I said, I'm taking this election in 1948 and I'm going to show what a stolen election is, because Lyndon Johnson did steal it to get to the Senate, won it by 87 votes, which were cast, as you know, 6 days after the other ballots. And the third volume is really about the Senate of the United States. It's called Master of the Senate, but it's as much about the Senate and how the Senate works as it is about Lyndon Johnson.
Are all of these books still in print?
Yes, none of my books, my publisher just told me, have ever been out of print in either hardcover or paperback for a single day.
And how about the number of editions you've got on some of the other books? You said 48.
I don't actually know. I just happen to know on the Power Broker because someone asked me, so I called and asked.
In the Master of the Senate, the book on Lyndon Johnson in the United States Senate, the quote you use out front is from LBJ. I do understand power. Whatever else may be said about me, I know where to look for it and how to use it. Who else in your lifetime that you've observed understands power that you can look back on, other than LBJ?
Well, Robert Kennedy, to just what's on the top of my mind right now. I mean, among the things, I mean, Robert Kennedy, I don't mean that in a pejorative sense. I mean, he understood. You watch Robert Kennedy take that nomination away from Lyndon Johnson in 1960. It is something to watch. I mean, can I tell you, I mean, like, it's like people think today that Kennedy had this nomination all wrapped up.
John F. Kennedy.
I beg your pardon. That John F. Kennedy had this nomination all wrapped up, you know. Not at all. In 1959, Lyndon Johnson is the great majority leader, with, to say more accurately, the very end of 1958. Lyndon Johnson is the great majority leader of the United States Senate. He is the powerful Democrat. He is the guy who's ahead. And to watch the Kennedys, President Kennedy, Robert Kennedy, and then the little brother, Ted Kennedy, how Robert Kennedy was such a genius. I mean, Johnson, among the reasons, Johnson looked at Robert Kennedy and saw someone who was just as good at counting votes as him. I mean, there's a quote in this, when he finally gets around to the western states, and he realizes Robert Kennedy has been there first. Robert Kennedy, I don't want to go into too much with this book back. Robert Kennedy sees there's a way of taking this nomination away from Lyndon Johnson, and the way is the western states. And there are 172 convention votes from these 9 western states. And Johnson thinks he has them all. And in fact, he has them all. And Robert Kennedy starts to take them away from him. And when Johnson finally realizes what's happening, this guy, Irv Hoff, who Johnson sends out there, says, you know, Bobby has the bridle and halter on, and he's not letting them take it off. And it was just, to follow this, you know, you ask about understanding political power. This isn't exactly to you, but I'll just say, when you find out how it really works, it's something we all should know. I mean, if we want to, this is the power that shapes all our lives. And in a democracy, we have a hand in conferring it. So the more we understand about it, hopefully at the end, the better the country would be. I mean, when I look back on this, I mean, I look back on interviews I had with Ted Kennedy. Can I just say a word about? I mean, you know, he was like, when I was talking about the Western states, the Kennedys originally don't think they have much of a chance out there. So Bobby, or Robert, but everyone calls him Bobby, but I'm going to call him Robert. Robert Kennedy sends his little brother out there. He's 27 years old, Senator Ted Kennedy. This is his first political assignment. And he sends him out to the Western states. And the Kennedys wound up taking most of these delegates. And I said, Ted Kennedy was extraordinarily helpful in trying to make me understand what was happening. And I said to him, you know, if you really want to help, you have to get the list. They send him out there with lists of the delegates and what he should, you know, how to approach each one and all. I said, if you really want to help, you have to get me those lists that jog your memory on what you were doing out there and talk to me going down the list. And he did that. He had his staff get the lists together. And then I went down and I spent, I believe, 2 nights with the Kennedys in Washington. And we talked all day, you know, and you really came away from that and you said, you know, Bob, you didn't understand this aspect of politics at all. So now I forgot what you asked.
But let me ask you something I've always wanted to ask you, that you introduced Ted Kennedy to the 2004 Democratic Convention?
Yes.
As a historian, why did you do that? Not as a person, but I mean, did you worry that somebody would say, he's too close?
The reason I did it was that he said he wanted to give, and intended to, give a speech that put the Democratic Party in historic context. And I had just finished doing this book on the Senate, you know, and it was like, I'm sitting up there thinking about the great senators of the past, Webster, Clay, and Calhoun, you know what I'm saying? But I'm watching a great senator. I mean, a man who always speaks up for the liberal cause, you know, and has been doing it for 40, whatever the number of years was then. And that's the context in which I introduced him to the convention. As it turned out, he wasn't able to give that speech because the people who were running the convention kept cutting his time shorter. It didn't quite work out as well as it was supposed to. But no, I didn't have a feeling that was going to compromise.
Is that your politics, the liberal part of the Democratic Party?
I guess you'd have to say that. Yeah. Well, I don't know that I define my politics that way. To me, as I've done these books, you know, it's like, you know, you're learning as you go along, Brian. You don't start out knowing this stuff. Like in the first volume, there's a whole big section on how Lyndon Johnson brought electricity to the hill country of Texas. And I was saying, you know, I don't know if the New Deal worked or not. I don't know to what extent it really helped or other forces would have helped. But I said to Ina, let's take a program that we can look at almost in isolation, because there was no electricity. The hill country was so isolated from the rest of America that you say there are no the outside forces are reduced to a minimum. It's not like something in the city where you have to talk about urban renewal or this or that. And you say, this is a tabula rasa. These people were never going to get electricity by themselves. No electric company was going to lay these thousands and thousands of miles of wire to isolated areas to bring it to one farm or one ranch. And I said, let's start out as if we don't know anything and go and interview. And of course, Ina did a lot of this interviewing. let's go to these farm wives who didn't, and find out what life was like before electricity and after electricity. You couldn't emerge from doing that without understanding that there are times when only government, where people are fighting forces that are too great for them to fight alone, and they better have government on their side, a government that's trying to help. So I don't know that I would define my politics so much as liberal. I don't think of it quite in that way.
Have you had any discussion with Ted Kennedy since his brain cancer?
I have not spoken to him since his operation, no.
You know, if you go back in the history of Bob Caro and the books on LBJ, you can find quotes from Jack Valenti saying that he didn't want to talk to you because you were destroying Lyndon Johnson's reputation, or Bob Hardesty called you dishonest. You did interview Lady Bird Johnson 10 times, seven times early in the whole process, but then she cut you off.
Yes.
What is it now? What is your relationship with the Johnson family or the people who are left from that administration?
Well, since you used those quotes against me, right, because I keep it to hand, Jack Valenti, who, as you know, and I think you've quoted on the air, several attacks on me, you know, in previous interviews. The last thing that he did was he wrote me this letter. This is a letter asking me for, well, perhaps I should give a little bit of you, when you ask. When you talk about the early right now, it's an era of cooperation, you know, and I can tell you about a number of the people who have come around. Valenti, of course, was unremittingly attacked my, you know, first two books, and then we were on a panel together at the Kennedy Library, you know, and he was sitting next to me, and he pulls out from his pocket this sheet of paper that he's going to read, whatever he says, you know, from, and I realize he's sitting next to me, and because his eyes weren't too good, he's typed this in big type, so that if I look over, I can probably see what the attack is going to be, and have a minute to prepare for it. And I look over and I see what I'm reading are words that I wrote. And what he said was, I won't try to quote him, was that I didn't like Mr. Caro's first two books, but I now, I now realize what he's doing. I know he will be the definitive Lyndon Johnson biographer. And in fact, I want to read you 3 of the most magnificent paragraphs I ever read. And he read me those 3 paragraphs from my book. Then there was a dinner at the Kennedy, after the panel at the Kennedy Library. And he said, we're staying at the same hotel, Mr. Caro. Could we ride back together? And when we rode back together, he really said things to me that were, well, since he's quite extraordinary. Really, well, I'm only going to say this because you talked about the wording of the attacks. I mean, he said, you know, my 2 favorite, the greatest historians were Macaulay and Gibbon, and I now know you will be like one. And then this letter that I have is actually a letter from him, written about a year later, asking me for a blurb for his last book, and
which was published after he died.
Yes, but he didn't know he was going to. Yes, he was working on it, and he, you know, he says, "Dear Bob, I take an implausible liberty by sending you the galley of my new memoir." He says, "It is a piece of effrontery for me to ask you to give me the gift of a comment from you about this book that we could put on the cover." Then he talks about my book again, and he says, that passage on page 715 of your volume is the most magnificent summary of Lyndon Johnson I have ever read. So the change in attitude of the Johnson people, most of the Johnson people, has been very, very dramatic. I tell you one So George Christian was Lyndon Johnson's last press secretary. And I had been asking George Christian, writing him and telephoning him and asking him for an interview for, I'm sure, 10 or 15 years. And he hadn't wanted to talk to me. And when my last book came out, I think just after I talked to you the last time, I was going to speak at the Texas Book Festival, be down in Austin. So I felt I might as well try him one more time. It can't hurt. And I had heard that Mr. Christian had lung cancer and that, in fact, he was shortly going to die. And so I telephoned him and he said, well, I do want to talk to you. So we had 3 interviews, and it's in a way, because of the element of death and mortality in this, it's something that's happened to me over and over again in the last few years with Johnson people. So as soon as I got to his office the first time, he said, I want to start right in on the day that Lyndon Johnson announced that he wouldn't run again. He said, I was with him all day, which he was. And he simply took me through that day, I had 3 interviews with him. The first, he was a very powerful lobbyist and very respected man in Austin. And he had this huge office that, as I remember, looked down on the Capitol dome, which I felt was sort of symbolic in a way. And the first interview, he hardly seemed ill at all. I remember he was very pale, and he had a little oxygen tank on wheels in the corner of his office, but he didn't really have to use it. This next interview was just about a week later. And that time he had to use the oxygen a lot, but we talked all day. Then the third time, we were talking, and after an hour he said something like, well, Bob, you're going to have to get the rest of it from somebody else. I'm going to call for someone to take me home. And he was very sick, obviously, that day. And in my memory, we'd have to he died just about a month later. Now, I've had, you asked about, so many of the, one of the interesting things about doing books that take so long is that so many of the Johnson people who throughout have been amazingly helpful have died since the last time we talked. So I have all their interviews here, but I can't pick up the phone and call them anymore.
This is not a great segue, but I do want to ask this because I know people are asking this. You'll see why. The same question. You started this when you were about 37 years old, this whole chase for the power story. You're now 74.
73.
I missed. What, you were born in 1935?
35. Yeah.
Okay, 73. I give you another year. Have you thought that through about your own age and your health and all that, and how you're dealing with what you already have collected if the worst would happen? I mean, we all think about that when we get older.
Well, of course you think about it, but if that's counterproductive to think about it because there's nothing I can do about it.
But I'm talking about you back things up, you talk to Ina, make sure that if something happens, you've got all this on the record, you can move ahead with at least what you've learned.
Well, I'm not sure exactly what you mean by that. I'm doing this book. You could do these books a lot faster, and I could be doing this a lot faster. The only argument for saying I'm not going to change the way I do things at all is sort of a boastful thing to say, if you learn something about political power and you write it, because you want people to understand it, then you don't want just one generation of people or one decade of people to get this. You want it to be there to endure. So what really takes the book so long for me to do is the writing and the rewriting, you know, and trying to get the facts right. And there are lots of shortcuts. I mean, I know you don't have to do it this way, but on the other hand, you say, well, this is a boastful thing to say, but none of these books have ever been out of print. You know, the Power Broker came out in '74, which is 34 years ago, or when this interview runs, perhaps 35 years ago. And the first Johnson book came out 27 years ago, you know, and they're still there. I mean, they're being used in a lot of colleges. You see them in, so I did have to make a decision with this book because I knew it was going to take a lot of years to do it. And I decided to do it exactly the way I did the other books.
All right, the second one, this is asked of you, I'm sure before, I may have even asked it of you. How have you financially, through these years, been able to do this? I mean, if somebody's sitting outside looking at this saying, dedicated himself to book writing only for all these years, can you do it? And what else did you have to do in order to be able to afford to live, or did the books alone make it comfortable for you?
Well, you ask these very good questions, but they cover such a period of time that you can't. I mean, when I was writing The Power Broker, we were completely broke. I mean, when we look back on that, on 7 years, you know, I was a reporter, and I decided this book on Moses should be done because somehow he had this power that nobody understood. I was, you know, when I started that book, I was, 29, something like that. We had basically no savings. You know, I was a reporter. We lived in a little house, you know, near this was before any real estate boom or anything. And I couldn't quit, you know. I had a very small contract. I mean, no one thought anyone would read a book on Robert Moses, including me, you know. I just thought I really wanted to do it, that it was necessary for someone to do it. And I got a contract. I refer to it as the world's smallest contract. You know, I can no longer remember if it was $5,000, of which they gave me $2,500, or $10,000, which gave me $5,000, but it was that area. And that wasn't enough to quit on. I got a grant for a year, so we quit. And at the end of the year, we were really out of money. And I came home one day, and Ina said, you know, we just sold the house. She hadn't told me she was putting it on the market. She loved that house. I didn't really care about the house, but Ina loved the house. And without telling me, she sold it so we could go forward with the book. Unfortunately, as I said, it was in the days before the real estate boom. So you're making me remember very emotional things here. So we only got enough money after the mortgage. We got $25,000 after the mortgage. That was only enough for another year. And the book wasn't nearly done. You know, it was going to take 4 or 5 more years. And we remember those 4 or 5 more years as struggling, just how are you going to pay the rent every month? You know, I still remember the rent up there, and we were living in a portion of the Bronx. And the rent was $362.73 a month, and that every month. It was hard to do that. So we were broke. You asked how you did The Power Broker. We were broke. With the Johnson book, I later found, you know, both my editor and I wanted me to do the Johnson book. I wanted to do it in volumes, you know, and I said, I just can't afford to do this because The Power Broker, while it's going on selling, and now it sold a lot of copies, I suppose. It wasn't an immediate bestseller or anything like that. And I later found out, because they were interviewed on television about it, that my editor, Bob Gottlieb, and my agent, Lynn Nesbitt, basically said, I told Bob I couldn't afford to do this in volumes. There was no way I was going to be able to afford to do it. And he basically said to Lynn, you know, it's Bob's job to do it. It's our job to figure out a way that he can do it. and my publisher has been extraordinarily generous. Of course, the last two books, as you know, have been the #1 bestseller, have reached the #1 bestseller. So it's not, I won't pretend that it's, now things are okay. But really, I have had publishers, not just Bob Godley, but Sonny Mehta, the present publisher of Knopf, who have been very patient with me in that area.
Do you think people can do this today?
No.
Know what you know about the publishing industry?
No. The last conversation David Halberstam and I had before he died, we used to have breakfast together sometimes. He said to me, you know, Bob, you and I are like long distance swimmers, because he did books, you know, that took a long time to do. He also did shorter books, but did books that take a long time to do. His book on Korea took, I think, 10 years. He said, you know, we, you and I, are going to make it to the other side. I don't think a young writer starting out today could possibly do that. And I'm afraid that's my feeling too.
Since your last book in 2002, you have any idea how many days or trips you've taken to the LBJ Library?
Since the last book?
Since the last book. In other words, are you
Right.
still spending time down there?
Well, we spent this year, we spent 4 months down there, sometime around the beginning of January through the end of April, something like that. Because they had opened some papers on Vietnam that hadn't been opened before, and that took a long time to go through. And then they had discovered, I kept saying on the vice presidency, you know, there's something missing here, you know. Where are George Reedy's memos? You know, they said, here are George Reedy's memos, you know, which are a lot. I said, no, that's Reedy's writing several a day to Lyndon Johnson. You know, where are they?
And he was his press secretary.
I'm sorry, George Reedy was this large bear of a man, you know. I mean, you know, you talked before about the Johnson people who were hostile to the first two books, but you know, the people who were there, you know, people like Valenti, and they came along later. The people who were with Johnson during the time that they covered by the first book never gave me any trouble. They all said something like, you know, he got it right, you know, and they were all extraordinarily helpful. And with Reedy, who was Johnson's press secretary for 15 years, and was closer to him professionally for most of this time than anybody else, I could just pick up the phone. You know, I had all these interviews with him, and then if you wanted to just call him and say, George, that scene you gave me, was Johnson sitting in the rocking chair on the sofa? You know, he'd say, on the sofa, and I could just hang up and go back to typing, you know. But they discovered some of Reedy, the bulk, a huge trove of memos were filed under the name of Willie Day Taylor, who was Reedy's secretary. They were misfiled, actually. So they had never been opened. And they were opening them for me. I mean, very helpful. One day ahead of me, you know, each file, when you want a file opened in a president, at least in the Lyndon Johnson Library, it has to be cleared by, you know, the CIA, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, if it's on foreign affairs, but there are all these agents, even if it's domestic stuff, it has to be cleared by, and then finally, it has to be cleared by an archivist down there to see that it doesn't harass or embarrass a living person, or that it conforms to the deeds of his will under which things are released. So they were delivering to me file folders, like the woman who was doing this, with the archivist who was doing this, named Claudia Anderson. And she was coming up to my desk and saying, let's say I was there in January, and when the opening process is completed, they write across the top of the file folder, opened on whatever date, by the name of the archivist. So she would be handing me these files, opened on January 17th, 2008 by Claudia Anderson, and I would be reading it January 17th or January 18th. No one had ever seen this volume of stuff that it took me 4 months to go to. So it's sort of, that's sort of thrilling, but I have spent a lot of time down there.
Do you ever find others as dedicated to one subject as you have been? I mean, do you find a lot?
Sure, there are. I mean,
But I'm talking about LBJ. Do you ever see people in those libraries doing the same kind of research you're doing?
no.
Of all the things that you have had access to, your interviews, and you've done, you ever told up how many interviews you've done?
No.
But it'd be
Thousands. Oh,
thousands.
sure. For the first volume, I did total it up. It's in the back of the book. Am I going to say 522?
But it's
a lot,
thousands.
hundreds of interviews. Yeah.
Your access to the library and other libraries, the oral histories. What are the the techniques that you use as a researcher? What has been the most valuable of all those different sources?
Well, you ask such good questions, but it's hard to answer them. I mean, there are different. Some things in the archives, in the written papers, are absolutely that you come across them. They're absolutely incredible. Like we taught, like trying to think of a fast way to tell this. You say in 1940, Lyndon Johnson is a junior congressman in say the beginning of October 1940. And you can tell this from the files because he's writing the committee chairman or he's writing the majority leader, John McCormick, can I please have a few minutes of your time? Suddenly, after November 4th, which was election day, 1940, they are writing him, the committee. Lyndon, can I have a few minutes of your time? What happened in October 1940 to change his status from junior congressman to a powerful guy? How did he get this power? Well, I was told the answer to that in my early interviews with a guy named Thomas J. Corcoran, Tommy the Corcoran, who was an intimate of both Roosevelt's and Johnson, a very powerful Washington figure. And I asked him that, and he said, he used to call me kid. He said, money, kid, money. He said, but you're never going to be able to write about that, kid. And I said, why not? And he probably said, why not, Mr. Corcoran? And he said, because you're never going to find anything in writing. And of course he was right. If you couldn't document that, he was talking about campaign contributions, cash campaign contributions. And you felt, no, I never write anything that I can't document, and I'm not going to be able to do anything with this. And then in the Johnson Library, quite by accident one day, because it was filed under a folder heading that seemed to have nothing to do with this, you suddenly found, I mean, you can find the details of it in my first book, a telegram from George Brown of Brown and Root, predecessor to Halliburton, saying in October 1940, Lyndon, the checks are on the way, A telegram back from Lyndon Johnson saying, I got them, but I'm not acknowledging them, tell them. But then you found the most amazing thing. There are 4 typewritten sheets of paper. They were in one of my file cabinets over here. There are 3 typed columns, Brian. In the left-hand, well, let me explain what. Lyndon Johnson was a political genius. He has no power. He's a junior congressman. But he realizes he has something that no other congressman has. He is the only congressman who knows 2 groups of people. On the one hand, he knows the Texas oilmen and contractors who want favors from the federal government, the continuation of the oil depletion allowance, big contracts, and are willing to pay in the form of campaign contributions to get them. On the other hand, he knows, and they are conservatives. They are, in fact, reactionaries. They are anti-Roosevelt. On the other hand, he knows all these Northeastern congressmen who are liberals, but who need campaign money. What he does is he says to the Texas people, only give through me. Give me enough money and only give it through me to hand out. And he lets it be known that this is the way they can get campaign contributions from Texas. On these 4 sheets of paper, there are 3 columns, typed columns. The left-hand column is the name of each congressman. The middle column is how much he's asking. And the amounts are so small that, it's $500, it's $1,500. I mean, it was a different, age. The third column is why he needs it, what they told John Connolly, Johnson's secretary, or Walter Jenkins, his other assistant, Why, Lyndon, one more round of advertising and I can win. Lyndon, I've got to have money for poll watches. Lyndon, I need $700 for one more ad. I can take these guys. Then in the left-hand margin, in Lyndon Johnson's handwriting, is written, if he's giving the guy the full amount that he asked for, he writes okay. If he's giving him part of it, he says okay, 500 or whatever. If he's not giving them anything, he writes no. But sometimes he writes no out. And I asked John Connolly, what did no out means? And he said, that meant that this guy was never getting anything from Lyndon Johnson. He says, you didn't cross Lyndon Johnson. Now, I have, when I came across that, I said, you can, if you spend enough time looking here, you can find anything. I mean, there's all these discussions now. We can't prove the effect of economic forces on the political process. Well, yes, you can. And that's the documentation of it.
Little time left. You dedicate one of your books to Bob Gottlieb.
Yes.
Is he still your editor?
Yes.
Random House has published all your books?
Knopf. A division of Random House, yes.
Has it made any difference as they've changed ownerships
Well,
over the years?
no. No, Bob has always been my editor. He's been my editor. He was my editor even when he was editor of the New Yorker. He kept editing my books. And Sonny has taken over in this, as I said.
Sonny Mehta.
Sonny Mehta. I'm one author who has nothing bad to say about their publisher.
You dedicated one of your books to Catherine Horrigan.
Yes.
She's still
Yes.
involved. Who is she?
Well, she's managing editor of Knopf, and Bob Gottlieb brought her in basically when I think she was just someone's assistant, and when the Power Broker was being edited, because he and I were having such fights. I think he felt it would help to have someone else in the room, and she turned out to have this. Kathy doesn't talk very much, but I think I wrote in the book that I dedicated to her that Bob and I learned that when she said something, we had both better listen. And so she's worked with me in so many ways. I mean, I have the same editor. Kathy's worked on the other aspects of the books for the whole 37 years I've been at Knopf, 38 years.
And you dedicated one of your books to Dr. Janet G. Travell.
Yeah.
Who is she?
Well, Dr. Travell, we know her as she was Jack Kennedy's White House physician, the one who got his back better. There was a time when I was doing the Power Broker when I hurt my back really badly. I couldn't get out of bed very much for about a year. That's when I had to start doing the research, a lot of the research during that time. And I remembered, I don't want to go into this. They couldn't seem to get me better, and they didn't want to operate. And Ina said, when you were covering Robert Kennedy's Senate campaign, didn't he once say that his brother would never have been president if it wasn't for this wonderful woman doctor? And I said, yes, but she'd never treat me. I was just, and Ina called her. And of course, she came up and treated me. She designed this desk so that it holds my weight. I mean, I don't have a bad back really anymore. But you see, it's designed with this cutout here so that when you're sitting here for long hours, it is holding the weight of your body, not your back. So the time she came to help me, things were in sort of a desperate strait, and that's why I dedicated it to her as well as Ina. All four books, of course, are dedicated to Ina, even if they're dedicated to someone else as well.
On that note, Robert Caro, we are out of time, and I thank you very much.
Thank you.
For a DVD copy of this program, call 1-877-662-7726. For free transcripts or to give us your comments about this program, visit us at qna.org. Q&A programs are also available as C-SPAN podcasts.